Hey folks, Doug Blake with Body Design University. Welcome to another weekly study. And in today's video, I want to talk to you about chapter 10. I've seen a number of posts in our Facebook group, just for instance. And by the way, we get students asking us this question all the time. How much is in chapter 10? How important is chapter 10? It's got a ton of material in there. So I definitely get it if you're, hitting that roadblock at chapter 10, you start looking at the material and you're going, geez, there's just a ton of material. That do I have to memorize everything? And the answer is yes, 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 and yes. Okay. So I'm just going to be honest with you. Like anything else, any other chapter in this textbook, your ultimate goal is to memorize as much of the material as you can. Is it an important chapter? Absolutely, it's an important chapter because it's heavily represented on the actual exam. So just put that aside, whether or not it's a heavily represented chapter or not. Hear this all the time, by the way, just as an aside. Please do yourself a big favor. There is no chapter in this textbook that does not have at least one question related to it. Just understand that. I know some folks will say, I don't remember seeing anything from chapter. Well, that's a pretty darn good memory. If you can remember out of 150 questions, whether a specific area had a question on it or not. It doesn't make any sense to go through chapter 12 or whatever, chapter 16, whatever the chapter is, and say, well, I'm not going to study it because there's not. No. Remember, ACE, like any of the NCCA accredited organizations, they write these textbooks and they represent the entire textbook at different percentages. That's why they have domains of information to study. So please, chapter 10 is very important because chapter 10 has a fair amount of questions that are on the exam that are represented by that particular chapter. So again, the reason this is an important video is because, a lot of students just throw their hands up and just go, I have no idea how I'm going to memorize this information. So let me help you out because it's specifically about chapter 10. Okay. However, remember that the basic concepts of studying work for anything you ever do. Your level of comfort with material is what either speeds up the process or sort of holds you back when it comes to memorizing information. Another thing to keep in mind, and I've said this 1,000 times probably on just about every video that we do, yes, memorization is the key. Okay. The idea of understanding something means you had to have memorized the information so that it's accessible. Please understand, learning, I don't care what it is. I don't care if it's hands-on, whatever the point, whatever it is, learning begins with memorization. So you've got to know your learning style. So that is tip number 1 on this video. Tip number 1, know your learning style. Google learning style test assessments and you'll get a million free, don't pay for anything, free. It'll kind of guide you. It's funny because we already know, you're watching this video, you already know kind of what your learning style is. Okay. I'll give you a great example. Do you like to read? Do you like to read books? Yes or no? If the answer is yes, you like to read books, you enjoy it, it really doesn't matter. Maybe you like science fiction, but the fact that you like to read and you like to visually, see what I just said, visual, you like to visually acquire information, and reading is one of those ways, you're probably a visual learner. Well, that's great because you're simply going to read through the textbook, read through chapter 10, and you're going to put, the headings and subheadings in a logical order that's going to help you to read it and rewrite it over and over and over so that ultimately it gets pushed from your short-term into your midterm memory banks. That's kind of the focus here. The idea is that if you know your learning style, tip number 1, know your learning style, because if you're not a visual learner and all you're trying to do is read it, that's why we see people frustrated. You're going to get really frustrated if you're a tactile learner or a audiological learner, primary, strong on the audio, strong on tactile, and you have to read a book. Come on, folks, there's some of you out there that just hate to read, and that's why you're struggling. I get it. Okay. That's probably the vast majority of people studying for this. People that want to be trainers tend to be more tactile type of individuals just in general. I'm going to tell you right now, from a tactile learning perspective, do yourself a big favor. You got to read and you got to write, rewrite, read it, rewrite it. You got to do it. I know it's a struggle for a lot of folks, but just use one of these, squeeze it while you're doing your studies. It actually helps to distract that need for tactile sensation. Many students have posted great comments about, get up and walk around, or get up and actually do the movement. If you don't understand flexion and extension, well, don't read it. If you're a tactile learner, well, don't read about, I mean, you have to read it, of course, because you got to know what the terms are, but read it, but then physically get up and do the movement, because that's the way your brain accesses information. And remember, you got to memorize the information so it's accessible later on, i.e. during an exam. Okay. So those are some of that's the main tip, though, is know your learning style. And you can test it. It's really pretty straightforward. Just go, like I say, go to Google, do any of the learning style assessments that you can find on there. If you're a visual, if you're a reading, writing type of learner, then for sure the textbook is your primary source of information. If you don't, for the visual learner, for somebody that does fine reading and rewriting, then the ACE Study Companion is a great idea. Remember, always have pieces of paper. My recommendation, by the way, for those of you that are visual learners, tactile learners can benefit from this as well. Just a little bit different for the tactile learner, but use different colors when you're writing and rewriting material. Remember, it doesn't matter what type of learner you are. Everybody, I don't care who you are, even if you're an audiological learner, you're going to have to read and rewrite. That's why the read, write, recite method that we profess here to be the best way to do this, read, write, recite, hits basically all of those elements. And so when you're reading the material and you're an audiological learner, you'd rather be listening. Well, say it out loud to yourself. Okay. The other thing is audio books. You can do your own audio book. I've seen students post in the Facebook group about doing their own audiobook. That's great. That's perfect, because once you say it out loud, you hear it one time. Hopefully you're rewriting it, rewriting. Well, now you can listen to yourself, right? If you don't mind listening to yourself, over and over and over. Remember, for the most part, memorization, learning is repetitive. Okay. It's work. It's hard work. There's no easy way to do this, unless you're, the 1/10 of 1% of individuals that can literally just read stuff and you got it memorized. Well, good for you. You probably don't need to be watching these videos anyway, because you've got it figured out and you'll pass pretty much every exam you ever take. So this is my recommendation when you're looking at chapter 10, for instance. Okay. A lot of information here. And so what I want to do is kind of give you a little bit of insight into the way I would do this if I'm studying chapter 10. A lot of information. So if you have your textbook, please follow along with your textbook on these studies. So if I got mine out, I'm showing you exactly what I'm doing. I'm not telling you to do anything that I not only do myself, but have always done when I'm studying. So chapter 10 is on muscular training assessments. Tip number 1, know your learning style, right? If you know what your learning style is, audiological or tactile or visual, it's going to help you now to attack chapter 10 and make some headway through memorizing the material. Let me look real quick. Look at this. Look how much information is in here. Look at that. Yeah, that's a lot, folks. Now, tip number 2, you got to know how much time you got. How much time do you have to study? Do you have 2 weeks to study? Do you have 2 months to study? Do you have 6 months to study? Well, let's take each one. If you've got 2 weeks to study and you're just throwing your hands up and you're sweating, listening and watching, well, chapter 10 is an important chapter, so you should spend more time. A percentage of your study time, a greater percentage, should be spent in one of the higher important chapters like chapter 10. You got 2 weeks, man, you're killing this one. 2 months, you're killing it, but you're also spending time on your other 2 months is a pretty, 60 to 90 days is pretty much good to get through the entire textbook and ancillary study materials, um, things that we obviously recommend at Body Design University. So if you got longer than that, now you can really buckle down and spend some time. That's tip number 2, right? So remember, got to know your learning style. Next tip number 2 is how much time do you have to study? Okay. Now, the third tip, this is critical. Every single chapter that you have decided you've got to spend a whole lot of time in, my recommendation for sure, very first thing that I do, and ASA has made this relatively easy for you, is on that very front page and on chapter 10, what page this is, 391, 393, 399, I guess, would be that chapter. Do yourself a big favor, write down all of these functional assessments, movement assessments, load speed assessments. Literally write that stuff down and say it out loud to yourself. So watch. You go ahead and people have told me that this helps them when I do this. So watch. I literally will write this down. Okay, see what I'm doing? Functional assessments. I am going to write down functional assessments. Yes, I'm a lefty. Functional assessments, static postural assessments. By the way, I'm not going to write the whole thing down, okay? But I wanted you to see this is the physical way I do it, and I'm using purple. So I'm going to write down all of this. Now, that is the tip, is beginning with that very first page. Write that down, so that gives you a general overview. You know, one of the things that we overlook from a studying perspective is the concept of, perusing and general overviews. I think it's probably one of the lost study techniques that you really should use. So that's kind of the third tip, is to write down what is in the chapter. Don't dive into the chapter so quick. Get a broad overview, get a 30,000-foot view. If you watch the general study guide video that we have for the ACE 6th edition, one of the first things I recommend you do is a perusal through the entire textbook, depending on how much time you have. If you only got 2 weeks, don't do it. If you got 2 months, yeah, do a full perusal. Well, next thing you can do if you have a longer time frame to study is peruse again each of the chapters. What's a perusal? It is simply reading through. Okay, so I know that these guys are in this chapter. And by the way, that helps a lot, because if I jump right into the chapter, I just have no hope. There's no hope, because it just goes on and on and on. And I have no hope. Well, if I come here and go, oh, so it's just this, this, and this, it gives me hope, right? Psychologically, I know that there's some ending point to this, and it gives me a frame of reference now to work on each of the pieces of material. The old adage of how do you eat an elephant, right? One bite at a time. Well, there it is. Those are your bites. Functional assessment, static postural assessment, and now it gives me a little bit better frame of reference to now hit this particular chapter. Okay, now, so I think that was the third tip. Next tip is, or third is, perusing and doing this at the same time. Now what I do is I literally allow my eyes to brush over the material. I'm not trying to learn it. I'm not trying to memorize anything. I'm getting a view of the pictures. I may read some of the side panel information. I'm simply functional assessment, static postural. I might read the think it through component, but I'm not trying to memorize anything. So I'm not going to spend any more than couple of seconds, maybe a minute on each page. I know on this page, I've got a figure 10.3, postural deviations, and I'm going to go through that. And that's again, it's another tip. If you have 30 days to do don't do this. This is if you have a little bit more time, 2 months, 3 months to study for the exam. Get a broad overview, a general 30,000-foot view of the material in the particular chapter. You'll notice that there's a number of, and on page 397, you'll notice you're starting with the bullet points. Bullet points are the best thing since sliced bread. you can just, again, I hope you understand what I'm doing is I'm just kind of familiarizing myself. It's a great tip. I'm familiarizing myself, and I'm looking at all. Once I get through this, chapter 10, I get through. Wow. Whew. Once I get through chapter 10, I get to the end, and now here's the next tip: read the summary, read the summary, read the summary. Okay, that's the tip. Now you're going to go back, and now this is one of the challenges in trying to help people to study, is that if you're an audiological learner, this is going to be a challenge for you. If you're a visual learner, not so much. Okay, the visual learner can actually now spend some time digging into the material, reading it and rewriting it. Okay, but don't just rewrite the entire chapter. Here is the next tip. It's one of the reasons why I had you actually write and rewrite at the very beginning of the chapter. Those heading titles, I'm in chapter 9. Those heading titles are going to be the beginning of your read, write, recite cycle. Hope that makes sense. So literally follow along with me now. Sounds like a children's story. Follow along with me as I start my study. Let's go ahead. I'm going to use a pen. Now I could, of course, use my blank paper, but I'm going to use my lined paper. Yes, my Hyatt Regency Orlando Airport. And now what do? I already know what my heading titles are and what my subheading titles are. This is where you start to attack the material and digest it and absorb it. So now what I'm going to do is, I know functional assessments, movement, and load speed assessments are all the main heading titles. Okay. Functional assessments, I hope you understand. So functional assessments is the heading title. Static postural assessments is a subheading. Static balance unipedal test is on the next page after that. Hope everybody understands that. Okay. As you go through this, you're going to notice all of these headings and subheadings. Okay, that's what I'm getting through right now. So static balance udipedal stance test. Now it took like 7-8 pages to get there. So static postural assessment, and this is what I'm going to do. Functional assessments. Yeah, I know it takes time and effort, but it's efficient, because now I don't have to keep going through, getting frustrated, and not memorizing the information. So I write functional assessments, and I'm going to do this: static postural assessment. You get the idea. And by the way, I'm going to do this with each one of these subheadings. When I get to that subheading, functional assessment, static postural assessment, I'm going to read through it. I'm going to do a brief read through, and I'm going to take note of specific areas in static postural assessments, such as a bolded word or phrase: neuromuscular efficiency. Write that down. Neuromuscular efficiency. What is neuromuscular efficiency? Also may offer valuable information, blah, blah, blah. Static postural assessment may serve as a starting point from which a personal trainer can identify muscle imbalances. Find out what neuromuscular efficiency means. You read through it. And now you've got these bullet points. So I'm going to write down neuromuscular efficiency. I'm going to write down these bullet points, and I'm going to move on. If you want to read through the think it through sections, nothing wrong with that. You can write that, but that's going to be postural deviations. Everywhere you see a heading or subheading title, you're going to write that down. Every time you get to a table, you need to understand that the tables can be extremely valuable and important. Okay. So again, in order to kind of keep it as brief as I can, I'm going to keep it at this point. Go through your headings and your subheadings. Your goal is to take each heading, subheading, and grab each piece of information that you can and spend time on that. Now, I've done a number of videos on how to deal with tables. Let me just go over this real quick with you. how I would do the table. Table 10.1, muscle imbalances associated with lordosis posture. I basically rewrite the table. Muscle imbalances, I literally write that out. I'm going to write facilitated, hypotonic, or shortened. I write all of this out. Folks, write it out. Take the time to write it. It's the physicality of writing that actually helps you. If you want to use different colors, use different markers, that can actually help you from a visual acuity perspective. Write this down, hip flexors, write it down. And then I write down inhibited or lengthened. Remember, this is muscle imbalances, lordosis posture. Write it down, hip extensors, external obliques. Get the idea. Let me get back out here and show you something now. Now, if you're a visual learner and you've gone through this material like I just showed you, and I'm breezing through it, and I'm hoping you're catching some of it, you're doing that through the whole chapter. Visual learners, not an issue. The read, write, recite method is really effective for the visual learner. Audiological learner, read, write is a little bit of a struggle, but you got to do it. But say it out loud and then record yourself. Okay, record yourself saying it. Okay, the audiological learner, the kinesthetic or the tactile learner, you're the ones that are going to have the biggest struggle. You're going to be sitting there fidgeting and going, geez, why did I even start doing this? Whatever. You got to read it. You got to rewrite it. What helps you to read and rewrite it is to distract yourself tactily. That's what these are for. I know you're not going to do it. Most people tell, no, they never do it. But you want to know what? The ones that do, they do way, way better at not being distracted. Okay. How many of y'all have ever, you're studying, you're doing all this. 20 minutes later, you're like, what the heck did I just read? Oh man. And then you get frustrated. Try one of these guys, the squishy ball. So while you're literally writing and rewriting the information, correctable factors. I'm a lefty, so I got this in my right hand. And as long as I got this in my right hand and I'm doing this, okay, and I can write correctable factors, repetitive move. I'm just showing you this is the technique. It takes a little bit of discipline. Yes, I know it does. Well, welcome to the real world of proper studying techniques where you can actually learn and memorize. It helps you to memorize. The other thing, of course, is that for the tactile kinesthetic learner, go through the table and then ask yourself a question. Hip flexors. Well, where are my hip flexors? Well, I can stand up and I can do hip flexors, and then I can think about the muscles that are. That's how I would do it from a kinesthetic learner or tactile learner perspective. I've literally gone through 3 pages with you. You've got to go through the whole chapter. Yeah, there's a lot to do in chapter 10. I get it. It's an important chapter though. And if you have some background in anatomy phys, and it's probably going to be a little bit more helpful. Look, I hope more than anything that this particular study this week helps many of you, really helps many of you to kind of buckle down into proper studying that takes work, but the payoff, the reward of doing it effectively, efficiency according to your learning style, the way your brain accesses and holds on to information, done that way, it won't be frustrating. It'll be hard and you should be sweating. But if you use the right techniques and you know what your learning style is, and now you're really accessing, memorizing material, then it should be that much easier. And that's why chapter 10 can be a challenge. So go through it. You're going to have to write it, rewrite it over and over and over. Please let us know if this particular video is helpful. However else we can help you to pass your ACE exam on the first attempt. That's kind of the goal. By the way, if it's not your first attempt, well, then it's whatever attempt you're on. That's what we're here to help you out with at Body Design University. Just let us know any other questions, specific questions to very specific areas within the textbook or how to study, for instance, and we will for sure reach out and try and help you. Thanks for coming on board this week. Have a great weekend. We'll see you next week. Thanks.